Some people find comfort in the familiar. A cozy home, predictable routines, and the warmth of bustling cities. For me, however, comfort lies in the unfamiliar. The abandoned, the forgotten, and the mysterious have always held an irresistible allure. It's a strange kind of fascination, I admit, to willingly walk into places others flee from, to chase shadows of the past and listen for the echoes of stories long silenced. Perhaps it's because abandoned places are like mirrors to time, unapologetically raw, stripped of life yet pulsating with untold histories. The idea for my journey began in an old bookshop, the kind you stumble upon down crooked alleyways, where the scent of leather bindings and yellowing pages feels alive. I wasn't looking for anything in particular that day, just killing time between trains in a city I can barely recall. But fate, or maybe just sheer coincidence, has a funny way of intervening. A thick, dusty volume caught my eye, Atlas Obscura, Forgotten Worlds. Its worn cover featured a map of the globe, littered with cryptic markings. I flipped through its pages, each one detailing eerie, deserted places. Forgotten cities reclaimed by nature, towns left in haste due to disasters, and underground tunnels housing secrets far older than their crumbling walls. But it wasn't just the places themselves that piqued my curiosity. It was the whispered promise of something more. The margins were scrawled with handwritten notes in faded ink, maps with red circles drawn around key locations, and cryptic questions like, what happened here? And why did they leave? The book had a peculiar energy, as though it was daring me to act. And I accepted. I packed light, a sturdy backpack, camera gear, a notebook, and a collection of maps and permits. This wasn't going to be a leisurely vacation. I was stepping into the unknown. Over the years, I'd read enough accounts of urban explorers stumbling into trouble. Collapsing floors, toxic air, and the occasional wild animal. To know this wouldn't be easy. But that was part of the allure. There's a certain thrill in walking into a place where nature has begun to reclaim what humanity abandoned. It's as if time itself conspires to erase what was once built, brick by brick, until all that remains are whispers. My plan was ambitious. 5 of the weirdest abandoned places in the world, each more haunting and bizarre than the last. I wasn't looking for tourist traps, no cliched ghost tours, or Instagram hotspots. I wanted authenticity, raw and unpolished. These places were relics of humanity's hubris, forgotten but not forgiving, where the past looms heavy like storm clouds before the rain. The journey was also deeply personal. It wasn't just about documenting decay. It was about confronting something within myself. I've always felt a strange connection to abandoned places, as if they were kindred spirits. Perhaps it's because I've never been good at staying still. People have come and gone in my life, leaving me like a half-built house. These places, I thought, might understand. The first stop was Hashima Island in Japan, also known as Battleship Island. Once a bustling coal mining facility, it now sits deserted off the coast of Nagasaki. Its jagged silhouette against the horizon resembled a warship frozen in time. As I read about its history, I couldn't help but imagine the lives that were lived there. Miners who toiled underground, children who played in the courtyards, families who thrived in the tight-knit community. Then came the fall, swift and brutal. The coal ran out, and so did the people, leaving behind skeletal buildings battered by the sea. From there, my path would take me to Pripyat in Ukraine, the ghost town on the doorstep of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. I'd seen photos of its infamous Ferris wheel, rusted and still, surrounded by overgrown weeds. But pictures couldn't convey the weight of tragedy that lingered in every corner. Thousands of lives were uprooted in a matter of hours, leaving behind toys, books, and the eerie remnants of daily life interrupted. The Catacombs of Paris were next. I'd always been drawn to the macabre, and what could be more surreal than an underground city of bones? Millions of skeletons line the labyrinthine tunnels beneath the bustling streets of Paris. To some, it's an ossuary. To others, a monument to mortality. To me, it was an enigma. How had such a hauntingly beautiful place come to exist beneath one of the world's most glamorous cities? In Pennsylvania, I planned to visit Centralia, the burning ghost town. It was once a vibrant mining community, but a coal fire beneath the town has been raging for decades, turning it into a smoldering wasteland. The earth itself breathes smoke through cracks in the asphalt, and the few who remain are cloaked in mystery. Centralia felt like the perfect metaphor for humanity's stubbornness, a place where people refused to leave even as the ground beneath them burned. Finally, I would make my way to Kolmanskop in Namibia, a ghost town swallowed by sand. Once a prosperous diamond mining settlement, it now stands as a testament to the impermanence of wealth and ambition. The desert is relentless, and as I read about the sand-filled rooms and creaking wooden floors, I felt a pull stronger than anything else. There was something poetic about nature reclaiming what humanity had tried to conquer. Each of these places promised a story, a moment frozen in time that begged to be uncovered. They were more than just destinations. They were chapters in a book I hadn't yet written. As I boarded the first flight, bound for Japan, I felt an electric anticipation coursing through me. My heart raced, not out of fear, but out of excitement for the unknown. Perhaps it's because I've never been good at staying still. People have come and gone in my life, leaving me like a half-built house. These places I thought might understand. The first stop was Hashima Island in Japan, also known as Battleship Island. Once a bustling coal mining facility, it now sits deserted off the coast of Nagasaki. Its jagged silhouette against the horizon resembled a warship frozen in time. As I read about its history, I couldn't help but imagine the lives that were lived there. Miners who toiled underground, children who played in the courtyards, families who thrived in the tight-knit community. Then came the fall, swift and brutal. The coal ran out, and so did the people, leaving behind skeletal buildings battered by the sea. From there, my path would take me to Pripyat in Ukraine, the ghost town on the doorstep of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. I'd seen photos of its infamous Ferris wheel, rusted and still, surrounded by overgrown weeds. But pictures couldn't convey the weight of tragedy that lingered in every corner. Thousands of lives were uprooted in a matter of hours, leaving behind toys, books, and the eerie remnants of daily life interrupted. The Catacombs of Paris were next. I'd always been drawn to the macabre, and what could be more surreal than an underground city of bones? Millions of skeletons line the labyrinthine tunnels beneath the bustling streets of Paris. To some, it's an ossuary. To others, a monument to mortality. To me, it was an enigma. How had such a hauntingly beautiful place come to exist beneath one of the world's most glamorous cities? In Pennsylvania, I planned to visit Centralia, the burning ghost town. It was once a vibrant mining community, but a coal fire beneath the town has been raging for decades, turning it into a smoldering wasteland. The earth itself breathes smoke through cracks in the asphalt, and the few who remain are cloaked in mystery. Centralia felt like the perfect metaphor for humanity's stubbornness, a place where people refused to leave even as the ground beneath them burned. Finally, I would make my way to Kolmanskop in Namibia, a ghost town swallowed by sand. Once a prosperous diamond mining settlement, it now stands as a testament to the impermanence of wealth and ambition. The desert is relentless, and as I read about the sand-filled rooms and creaking wooden floors, I felt a pull stronger than anything else. There was something poetic about nature reclaiming what humanity had tried to conquer. Each of these places promised a story, a moment frozen in time that begged to be uncovered. They were more than just destinations. They were chapters in a book I hadn't yet written. As I boarded the first flight, bound for Japan, I felt an electric anticipation coursing through me. My heart raced, not out of fear, but out of excitement for the unknown. The air was thick with tension as we approached the Chernobyl exclusion zone. Our guide, a wiry man named Mikhail, spoke sparingly, his hands gripping the wheel of the van like it was the only thing tethering him to sanity. Outside, the world seemed frozen in a perpetual state of late autumn. Trees stripped bare, their skeletal branches clawing at the sky, fields overgrown and untamed. The only sign of life was the occasional crow, its black wings cutting a sharp contrast against the muted grays and browns of the landscape. Pripyat was close now. I could feel it in my chest, a subtle tightening, like the air itself knew we were nearing a place where life had abruptly stopped. Mikhail's voice broke the silence. "This is the checkpoint," he said, nodding toward a small booth ahead. A guard in a weathered uniform waved us forward, his expression unreadable. After a quick exchange of documents and some mumbled words in Ukrainian, we were waved through. The gate creaked open, and we crossed into the zone. From the moment we entered, it was clear this was no ordinary ghost town. Unlike other abandoned places, where nature slowly reclaims what humans leave behind, Pripyat felt as if it had been snatched away mid-sentence. Buildings stood eerily intact, their windows like hollow eyes staring back at us. The streets, once filled with families, now lay buried under layers of leaves and debris. There was an uncanny stillness, as though the city itself was holding its breath. Mikhail parked the van near what had once been the city center. "This is as far as we drive," he said, pulling a Geiger counter from his bag. The device emitted a steady clicking sound, growing louder as he moved toward the van's rear doors. "Radiation levels are safe here, but don't touch anything unless you want to glow in the dark." He gave a wry smile that didn't reach his eyes. I stepped out, the crunch of gravel under my boots startlingly loud in the silence. The wind carried a faint metallic tang, a reminder of the invisible danger that still lingered. Ahead of us loomed the infamous Ferris wheel, its yellow gondolas rusted and still. It stood as a symbol of the tragedy, a monument to dreams interrupted. "This was supposed to open on May Day," Mikhail said, gesturing toward the wheel. "May 1st, 1986. The explosion happened 5 days earlier." His voice was flat, almost clinical, but there was an undercurrent of sorrow that even he couldn't suppress. I walked closer, my footsteps muffled by the overgrown grass. The Ferris wheel wasn't just a relic of the past. It was a stark reminder of the fragility of human plans. Beneath it lay the remains of the amusement park, a bumper car arena, its floor buckled and warped, a small carousel, its paint peeling in jagged flakes. The echoes of children's laughter seemed to hang in the air, twisted into something darker by the years of silence. "This way," Mikhail called, motioning toward a nearby building. We entered what had once been a school. The floor was littered with debris, broken desks, faded textbooks, and shards of glass that glittered like cursed diamonds. On the walls, murals of smiling children still clung to life, their vibrant colors faded but not forgotten. I picked up a small notebook from the floor, its pages curling with age. Inside, a child's handwriting was preserved in faded ink, a simple arithmetic problem left unfinished. I shivered. It wasn't the cold. It was the weight of what this place represented. Thousands of lives had been uprooted in the span of hours, their possessions left behind as if they might return at any moment. But they didn't. They couldn't. "Come upstairs," Mikhail said, his voice echoing through the empty corridors. The second floor was worse. Here, the sense of abandonment was palpable, almost suffocating. A piano sat in the corner of a classroom, its keys warped and yellowed. I pressed one tentatively, the dull, discordant note reverberating through the space like a ghostly wail. Mikhail leaned against the doorframe, watching me. "Music teacher used to play that every morning," he said. "It was a signal for the children to start the day." I nodded, unable to speak. The weight of history pressed down on me, the unshakable feeling that I was trespassing on sacred ground. "Not far from here is the hospital," Mikhail continued. "That's where they brought the first firefighters after the explosion. Most of them died within weeks." His words hung in the air as we exited the school and made our way toward the hospital. Along the way, we passed apartment blocks, their facades streaked with grime. Balconies sagged under the weight of decades, and curtains fluttered in broken windows. A tricycle lay overturned in the middle of a courtyard, its red paint still faintly visible beneath layers of rust and dirt. The hospital loomed ahead, a hulking structure that seemed to radiate unease. The Geiger counter clicked more urgently as we approached, its rhythm quickening like a warning heartbeat. Mikhail held up a hand. "We don't go inside," he said. "The basement is where they stored the firefighters' uniforms. Radiation levels are still deadly." I peered through the shattered windows. Inside, the decay was profound. Beds lay in disarray, medical equipment rusted and obsolete. But what struck me most was the eerie symmetry. It was as if the hospital had been frozen mid-operation, its staff and patients simply vanishing into thin air. We lingered for a while, taking in the gravity of the place. Mikhail pointed out landmarks as we moved through the city. The cultural center, its stage collapsing under the weight of years. The swimming pool, its tiles chipped and discolored but still recognizable. Each location told a story, not just of abandonment but of resilience. What happened here was a tragedy, Mikhail said as we stood in the shadow of a crumbling theater. But nature doesn't care. It reclaims what we leave behind. He was right. Already, the city was being consumed. Trees sprouted through cracks in the pavement, their roots curling around concrete like nature's revenge. Ivy snaked up walls, and wildflowers bloomed in unexpected places. It was both beautiful and heartbreaking, a reminder of the cycle of life and decay. As the day wore on, we made our way back to the van. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly. I looked back at Pripyat one last time, the Ferris wheel silhouetted against the orange glow. Do you think they'll ever come back? I asked Mikhail. He shook his head. No, this place is a graveyard now. His words stayed with me as we drove out of the zone. Pripyat wasn't just a city. It was a monument to human fallibility, a stark reminder of the consequences of our actions. And yet, it was also a testament to survival, the resilience of nature, the indomitable will to adapt and endure. As the van rumbled down the empty road, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Sorrow for what was lost, awe for what remained, and an unshakable sense of connection to this forgotten place. Pripyat wasn't just a destination on my journey. It was a chapter in the story of humanity, a reminder of our fragility and our strength. The entrance to the Catacombs of Paris was unassuming, tucked away on a quiet street far from the grandeur of the Eiffel Tower or the bustling energy of the Champs-Élysées. A simple stone arch marked the gateway to the underworld, its carved inscription chillingly blunt. Eerie, c'est ici l'Empire de la Mort. Stop. This is the Empire of Death. If Pripyat had been a reminder of human fallibility, the catacombs were a testament to our obsession with mortality. Beneath the lively streets of Paris lay a labyrinth stretching over 200 miles, filled with the remains of more than 6 million people. It wasn't just a burial ground. It was a monument to the fragility of existence, a memento mori carved into the very bones of the earth. I had booked a private tour through a local historian named Clement, a middle-aged man with a thick accent and a passion for the macabre. He met me at the entrance, holding a lantern that flickered faintly against the encroaching darkness. "You ready to descend?" he asked, his voice low but tinged with excitement. I nodded, gripping the straps of my backpack tighter than necessary. "As ready as I'll ever be." Clement smiled, his teeth catching the dim light. "Good. But remember, once we're inside, stay close. It's easy to get lost down there, and not everyone who wanders in finds their way out." With that ominous warning, we began our descent. The stone staircase spiraled downward, its steps worn smooth by centuries of use. Each footfall echoed faintly, the sound swallowed by the depths below. The air grew colder with every step, carrying a damp, earthy scent that clung to my skin. After what felt like an eternity, we reached the first chamber. The walls were lined with neatly stacked bones, femurs and skulls arranged in eerie patterns, their hollow eyes staring out as if in silent judgment. My breath hitched at the sheer scale of it. This wasn't just a collection of skeletons. It was an artwork of death, a macabre tapestry woven from the remains of countless lives. "This section is from the late 18th century, Clement said, his voice reverent. "When the city's cemeteries overflowed, they began transferring the dead here. It was a matter of necessity, but over time it became something more, a reflection of how we grapple with our mortality." I ran my fingers lightly over the stone, careful not to touch the bones. The skulls seemed almost polished, their smooth surfaces glinting faintly in the lantern light. "Does it ever feel overwhelming?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Clement shrugged. "Overwhelming, yes, but also humbling. Down here, there is no difference between kings and beggars. Death makes us all equal. We moved deeper into the catacombs, the passageways narrowing and twisting like veins beneath the skin of the city. The lantern cast long, flickering shadows that danced along the walls, giving the illusion that the bones were alive, shifting and breathing. As we walked, Clement shared the history of the catacombs. Originally, the tunnels had been limestone quarries. Their stone used to build much of Paris. But in the late 18th century, as the city's cemeteries became overcrowded, the tunnels were repurposed into a vast ossuary. The remains were transferred at night, priests chanting prayers as cartloads of bones were lowered into the depths. Not all of the tunnels are safe, Clement warned. Some sections have collapsed over the years, and others are flooded. There are stories of people who wandered too far, urban explorers mostly, who were never seen again. I glanced at him, uneasy. Never seen again? He nodded solemnly. The catacombs are a maze. Without a guide, it's easy to lose your bearings. And once you're lost, well, the dead don't give up their secrets easily. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. I stayed close to Clement as we ventured deeper, the air growing colder and heavier with every step. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the soft crunch of gravel underfoot and the occasional drip of water from the ceiling. We entered a larger chamber, its walls adorned with inscriptions carved into the stone. Latin phrases and biblical verses were interspersed with dates and names, some so faded they were barely legible. Clement paused, holding the lantern aloft to illuminate the room. "This is the crypt of the sepulchre," he said, "one of the most famous sections of the catacombs. Many of the inscriptions here were added by the quarrymen who worked in the tunnels, anonymously, of course. Some are warnings, others reflections on the nature of life and death." I traced the edges of one inscription, its letters worn smooth by time. Hodi mihi, kras tibi. Today it is me, tomorrow it will be you. The weight of the words settled over me like a shroud. Standing in that chamber, surrounded by the bones of the dead and the echoes of their lives, I felt a strange mix of awe and unease. It was as if the catacombs were alive, their walls pulsing with the collective memory of centuries. As we continued, Clement pointed out other points of interest: a well that once supplied water to the quarry workers, a carved altar used for secret rituals, and a wall of bones arranged into the shape of a heart. Each stop added another layer to the tapestry of the catacombs, revealing them to be not just a burial site, but a testament to human ingenuity and spirituality. But there was one section Clement seemed reluctant to discuss. As we passed a narrow, unlit tunnel, his lantern dipped, casting its light away from the entrance. "We don't go down there," he said firmly. "Why not?" I asked, curiosity piqued. "It's called the Lost Gallery," he replied. "No one knows how far it goes. There are rumors of strange things down there. Sounds, lights, even shadows that move on their own. Some say it's cursed." His words sent a chill through me, but I resisted the urge to look down the darkened passage. The weight of the catacombs was already pressing heavily on me. I didn't need to invite more. We pressed on, reaching the final chamber of our tour. It was the largest yet, its vaulted ceiling soaring high above us. Here, the bones were arranged into intricate patterns: crosses, spirals, and even the outline of a skull. It was both beautiful and grotesque, a work of art crafted from death itself. Clement set the lantern down and turned to face me. "This is where I like to end my tours," he said. "It's a reminder that even in death, there can be beauty." I nodded, taking in the haunting symmetry of the room. The catacombs were unlike anything I had ever experienced, an intersection of history, art, and mortality. They were a place of contradictions, where the living and the dead coexisted in uneasy harmony. As we made our way back to the surface, I felt a strange sense of relief. The weight of the catacombs lifted with each step, replaced by the growing warmth of sunlight and the distant hum of the city above. When we finally emerged, the bustling streets of Paris seemed almost surreal, their energy a stark contrast to the silent depths below. I turned to Clement, who was already lighting a cigarette. "Thank you," I said, "for showing me this. He nodded, exhaling a plume of smoke. The catacombs have a way of staying with you, he said. Once you've been down there, you see the world differently. He was right. As I walked away, the noise of the city fading into the background, I felt the weight of the catacombs in my chest. They weren't just a place. They were an experience, a reminder of the fragility of life and the inevitability of death. And as much as they unnerved me, I knew I would carry their memory with me forever. I'd read about Centralia before. How could I not? The story of a town abandoned because of an unrelenting underground fire sounded like something out of a dystopian novel. Yet, as I drove along Route 61, heading toward the ruins of this once thriving mining town, I realized nothing I had read or imagined could prepare me for what I was about to encounter. The road itself was my first clue that Centralia wasn't just another abandoned place. Known colloquially as the Graffiti Highway, it was a stretch of asphalt buckled and cracked by the heat of the inferno below. Smoke seeped from fissures in the ground, curling lazily into the crisp Pennsylvania air. Every surface of the road was covered in colorful graffiti, messages, names, and strange, cryptic symbols left by those who had ventured here before me. It was oddly beautiful in its destruction. The vibrant colors of the graffiti contrasted sharply with the desolation around it. Trees stood blackened and twisted, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal hands. Patches of ground were barren, the soil poisoned by toxic gases escaping from the earth. The air carried an acrid tang, a reminder that the fire beneath Centralia had been burning for over 60 years, and showed no sign of stopping. I parked my car near the remnants of a church, one of the few structures that still stood. The lot was empty, save for a rusted sign warning visitors of the dangers of the area. My guide for this trip was a local man named Travis, a grizzled figure in his late 50s who had grown up in Centralia before the evacuation. "Welcome to hell," Travis said with a dry chuckle as I stepped out of the car. His tone was light, but his eyes told a different story. They were filled with a mix of nostalgia and sorrow, a man grappling with the loss of a home that no longer existed. "Thanks for meeting me," I said, shaking his hand. "No problem," he replied. "Not many people come out here anymore, but those who do, well, they usually have questions." I nodded, gesturing toward the smoking fissures in the ground. "Does it ever stop?" Travis shook his head. "Nope. Started in 1962, and it's been burning ever since. They've tried everything to put it out. Digging, flooding, sealing it off, but the fire just keeps finding new fuel. That's coal for you. Once it catches, it doesn't let go." He led me toward the remains of the town, pointing out landmarks as we walked. "That used to be the post office," he said, gesturing to a crumbled foundation overtaken by weeds. "And over there was the old pharmacy. You'd never know it now, but this place used to be full of life. Families, schools, churches, all gone." As we ventured deeper into the heart of Centralia, the sense of desolation grew. Entire streets had disappeared, swallowed by nature and the creeping advance of the fire. Only a handful of structures remained. Some homes, their windows boarded up and their roofs sagging, and the occasional utility pole standing as a lonely sentinel. "What was it like growing up here?" I asked, breaking the silence. Travis stopped, his gaze distant. "It was a good town," he said finally. "Everybody knew everybody. It wasn't perfect, but it was home. Then came the fire, and everything changed. At first, people thought it was just a small problem, something they'd fix in a few weeks. But the weeks turned into months, and the months into years. Eventually, it got so bad the government stepped in, bought out most of the town, told us to leave." "Did everyone go?" "Most did," he said, his voice tinged with bitterness. "But a few of us stayed behind. My family moved out when I was a teenager, but some folks refused to leave. They'd lived here their whole lives, and they weren't about to abandon it." I thought about the stubbornness that must have taken, the defiance of choosing to stay in a place where the ground itself was a threat. "Are there still people here?" "A few," Travis said. "Not many, though. The government cut off utilities years ago. No electricity, no water. The people who stayed had to get creative." We continued walking, the ground warm beneath my boots despite the cool autumn air. Travis stopped near a small hillside, where a plume of smoke rose lazily from a crack in the earth. He pulled out a small handheld thermometer and held it over the fissure. "Take a look," he said, handing it to me. The display read 145 degrees Fahrenheit. I stared at it, my mind struggling to process the reality of standing atop a fire that had been burning for decades. "How deep is it?" I asked. "Hard to say," Travis replied. "Some parts are shallow, just a few feet down. Others go for miles. It's like a network of tunnels down there, all filled with coal. The fire spreads through them, eating everything in its path." We stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the place pressing down on me. Centralia wasn't just abandoned. It was alive, in a way that was both terrifying and mesmerizing. The fire beneath the town was a constant presence, a reminder of humanity's inability to control the forces we unleash. As we walked back toward the remnants of the main street, I noticed something unusual. Amid the ruins and overgrowth, there was a tree adorned with colorful ribbons and trinkets. Travis noticed my curiosity and chuckled. "That's the wish tree," he said. "People started leaving things there years ago. Prayers, wishes, whatever you want to call them. Some folks think the fire has some kind of energy to it, like it's alive. They come here to leave their troubles behind." I approached the tree, examining the items tied to its branches. There were handwritten notes, photographs, even a pair of children's shoes. Each one carried a story, a piece of someone's life left behind in this strange, burning place. "Do you believe in that?" I asked, turning to Travis. He shrugged. "I don't know, but there's something about this place that gets under your skin. Once you've been here, you never forget it." As the day wore on, Travis showed me more of the town, what little was left of it. We visited the remains of the municipal building, now little more than a pile of rubble. We walked through the cemetery, its headstones leaning at odd angles, as if the earth itself was trying to push them away. And we stood in the shadow of an old church, its steeple still intact despite the passage of time. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the desolate landscape, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Centralia was a place of contradictions, beautiful in its destruction, haunting in its silence. It was a testament to humanity's resilience and its hubris, a reminder of what happens when we dig too deep and reach too far. Before I left, I returned to the wish tree, pulling a small notebook from my backpack. I tore out a page and wrote a simple message. "May we learn from our mistakes before it's too late." Folding the paper, I tied it to a branch alongside the others, the ribbon fluttering softly in the breeze. Travis watched me with a faint smile. "You're part of it now," he said. I nodded, feeling a strange sense of connection to this place and its history. Centralia wasn't just a ghost town. It was a living reminder of our capacity for both creation and destruction. As I drove away, the smoke rising in my rearview mirror, I knew I would carry its memory with me for the rest of my life. The desert seemed endless, a vast expanse of golden sand stretching to the horizon, broken only by the occasional acacia tree or the shimmer of distant dunes. The air was dry and still, heavy with a silence that felt almost sacred. As I drove toward Kolmanskop, the ghost town half buried in the Namib desert, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was heading toward the edge of the world. Kolmanskop was once a thriving diamond mining town, built by German settlers in the early 20th century. Stories of its former glory painted a picture of opulence. Luxurious homes, a theater, even an ice factory in the middle of the desert. But now, it was a hollow shell of its former self, swallowed slowly by the relentless sands. The first glimpse of Kolmanskop came as I crested a small dune. The ghostly outlines of its buildings appeared on the horizon, their edges softened by decades of wind-blown sand. From a distance, it looked like a mirage, a dream fading in and out of focus. But as I drew closer, the town took on a more tangible form, a collection of decaying structures fighting a losing battle against the encroaching desert. I parked my Jeep near what had once been the town's main street, stepping out into the heat of the midday sun. The sand was warm underfoot, shifting slightly with each step, as if the desert were alive and watching. My guide for the day was a local historian named Amara, a petite woman with sun-weathered skin and an easy smile. She waved as I approached, holding a wide-brimmed hat against the wind. "Welcome to Kolmanskop," she said, her voice carrying a lyrical cadence. "Or what's left of it." She handed me a water bottle and motioned toward the ruins. "Let's start with the manager's house. It's the most intact building here, and it'll give you a sense of what life was like when this place was thriving." We trudged through the sand, the wind carrying faint whispers as it swept past the skeletal remains of the town. The manager's house loomed ahead, its once grand facade battered and weathered by decades of exposure. Inside, the air was cooler, the walls offering some respite from the relentless sun. "This was where the mine manager lived," Amara explained, gesturing to the spacious interior. "Back then, Kolmanskop was one of the richest towns in the world. Diamonds were so plentiful. They say you could find them just lying in the sand." I ran my fingers along a crumbling windowsill, imagining the life that had once filled these rooms. Faded wallpaper clung stubbornly to the walls, and the remnants of furniture lay half-buried in drifts of sand. A broken piano sat in the corner, its keys warped and cracked. "The wealth here was extraordinary," Amara continued, "but it came at a cost. The miners worked long hours in brutal conditions, and many of them died from accidents or illness. When the diamonds ran out, the people left, and the desert began to reclaim what was hers." Her words hung heavy in the air as we moved deeper into the town. Each building we entered told a similar story. Grand designs now in ruins, their interiors filled with sand that had crept in through broken windows and crumbling walls. In the old ballroom, sunlight streamed through shattered skylights, illuminating the golden grains that covered the floor like a ghostly dance floor frozen in time. "Imagine the parties they must have had here," Amara said, her voice tinged with wistfulness. "This was the heart of the town, a place for music and laughter. Now it's just empty." We moved on, passing through what had once been the butcher shop, the bakery, and the schoolhouse. Each location had its own eerie charm, a strange beauty in its decay. In the schoolhouse, a chalkboard still bore faint traces of writing, the remnants of a lesson left unfinished decades ago. "It's like the town just paused," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Amara nodded. "That's the thing about places like this. They're frozen in time, caught between the past and the present. But the desert doesn't pause. It keeps moving, reshaping everything in its path." We reached the hospital, a towering structure that had once been the pinnacle of modern medical care in the region. Inside, the decay was even more pronounced. Rusted beds lay overturned in the sand, and shattered glass crunched underfoot. A faint smell of rust and dust hung in the air, a ghostly reminder of the lives that had once been saved or lost within these walls. As we climbed the stairs to the second floor, Amara paused, her expression suddenly serious. "There's something I want to show you," she said. She led me to a room at the end of the hall, its door hanging precariously on rusted hinges. Inside, the sand had piled high, almost reaching the ceiling in some places. In the center of the room stood an old, wooden wardrobe, its doors slightly ajar. "This wardrobe was found by a group of researchers a few years ago," Amara explained. Inside, they discovered letters and photographs from the town's early days. Most of it was ordinary, family photos, receipts, things like that. But there was one letter that stood out. She handed me a laminated sheet, the letter carefully preserved beneath the plastic. The handwriting was elegant, the ink faded but legible. It was a farewell letter, written by a miner to his family as he prepared to leave Kolmanskop for good. "The desert has taken everything," it read. "The diamonds are gone, the people are gone, and now it's time for me to go too. But a part of me will always remain here, buried in the sand." I stared at the letter, the weight of its words sinking in. It was a reminder that Kolmanskop wasn't just a collection of ruins. It was a place where people had lived and loved, worked and dreamed. As the afternoon wore on, the wind began to pick up, sending ripples across the dunes and creating an eerie howling sound that seemed to echo through the empty buildings. Amara and I made our way to the edge of town, where the desert stretched endlessly in every direction. "This is where the train station used to be," she said, pointing to a cluster of beams barely visible above the sand. It was the lifeline of the town, bringing in supplies and taking out diamonds. Now it's nothing but a memory. We stood in silence, watching as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the sand. The golden light bathed the ruins in a warm glow, transforming them into something almost magical. "Do you think anyone will ever come back here?" I asked. Amara shook her head. "The desert doesn't give back what it takes. Kolmanskop will eventually disappear entirely, buried beneath the sand. But its story will live on, as long as people like you come to see it." Her words stayed with me as we made our way back to the jeep. Before we left, I turned to take one last look at the town. The buildings stood like sentinels, their silhouettes stark against the darkening sky. In the distance, a dust devil danced across the dunes, a fleeting reminder of the desert's restless spirit. As I drove away, the ghost town slowly disappeared from view, swallowed once again by the vast expanse of the Namib. Kolmanskop was a place of contrasts, both beautiful and haunting, a reminder of humanity's fleeting presence in the face of nature's enduring power. I knew I would carry its memory with me, just as the miner had written in his letter. A part of me would always remain here, buried in the sand, a witness to the passage of time and the resilience of the desert. It was nearly dusk when I stepped off the plane, the familiar hum of the airport a jarring contrast to the eerie silence I had grown accustomed to during my journey. The buzz of humanity felt both overwhelming and grounding, as if life had suddenly roared back into focus. I clutched my journal tightly as I moved through the crowded terminal, my thoughts still half buried in the ruins I had explored over the past few weeks. Hashima, Pripyat, the Catacombs, Centralia, Kolmanskop, each place had left its mark on me, not just in the pages of my journal but somewhere deeper, in the parts of myself I rarely visited. These weren't just abandoned locations. They were chapters in a story I had unwittingly become a part of. Each step I had taken, each crack in the floor I had carefully avoided, each whisper of wind or creak of an old door had brought me closer to understanding not just the places themselves, but also the people who had lived and died there, and, in some strange way, myself. By the time I got home, the sun had set, casting my apartment in a soft, golden light. I tossed my bag onto the couch and set my camera gear and notebooks on the table. The silence of the space was almost comforting, a gentle reminder that I was back where life still thrived. But even as I unpacked, I could feel the weight of the journey pressing on my shoulders, a quiet pull toward the stories I had gathered. I sat down, flipping through my journal. Each page was filled with scribbled notes, sketches, and photographs I had pasted in along the way. Together, they told the story of 5 abandoned places, each strange and haunting in its own way, each holding a mirror to humanity's hopes, failures, and resilience. Reflections on Hashima. Hashima Island had been the perfect beginning, a place where the relentless force of nature met the stubborn remnants of human ambition. Standing amidst its crumbling concrete towers, I had felt the weight of its history pressing down on me. The miners who had toiled beneath the sea, the families who had filled its narrow alleys with laughter and life. I thought back to the moment I had stood at the edge of one of the buildings, staring out at the sea. The waves had crashed against the shore with an almost rhythmic precision, as if marking the passage of time itself. And yet, for all its decay, Hashima was alive in its own way. The stories of those who had lived there whispered through its corridors, carried by the wind that howled through broken windows. What does it mean to be forgotten? I had written in my journal that day. Does history preserve us, or do we preserve history by choosing to remember? Shadows of Pripyat. Pripyat had been different, heavier, more suffocating. The air there was thick not just with radiation, but with the grief of thousands of lives uprooted in an instant. Walking through the Ferris wheel, the school, the hospital, I had felt like an intruder, a visitor in a place that belonged only to ghosts. Even now, I could picture the children's notebooks scattered across the floor of the school, the faint outlines of chalkboard lessons left unfinished. It was a place frozen in time, but not by choice. Nature had begun to reclaim it, vines creeping through cracks in the walls, trees growing through the floors. Pripyat was a reminder that life goes on, even in the shadow of tragedy. It's not the end, I had written after leaving. It's a pause, an interruption in a story that's still being told. Beneath Paris, the Catacombs of Paris had been unlike anything else. A journey into the very bones of history, both literal and figurative. As I had descended those narrow, winding staircases into the earth, I had felt a mix of awe and dread. The catacombs were a labyrinth, a place where the line between life and death blurred into something incomprehensible. I flipped to the page where I had sketched one of the inscriptions carved into the stone. Hodi mihi, kras tibi. Today it is me, tomorrow it will be you. Those words had stayed with me long after I had emerged back into the bustling streets of Paris. They were a stark reminder of mortality, a truth we all share, no matter our status or wealth. The catacombs had forced me to confront questions I wasn't sure I was ready to answer. What does it mean to leave a legacy? How do we ensure our stories are remembered, even after we're gone? The eternal fire of Centralia. Centralia had been haunting in its own way, a place where the earth itself seemed alive. The smoke that rose from its cracks, the graffiti-covered roads, the eerie silence broken only by the hiss of escaping gas. It was a vision of apocalypse, yet there was a strange beauty in its destruction. I thought about Travis, the guide who had shown me the remnants of his hometown. His stories of the people who had refused to leave, even as the ground beneath them burned, had stuck with me. Centralia wasn't just a ghost town. It was a testament to human resilience and stubbornness. Before I had left, I had tied a note to the wish tree. May we learn from our mistakes before it's too late. Even now, I wasn't sure who that message was meant for, the world, myself, or the fire that still burned beneath Centralia's surface. Kolmanskop and the sands of time. Finally, Kolmanskop had been a quiet but powerful ending to my journey. The Namib desert had swallowed the town whole, but in its decay, there was a kind of poetry. The sand-filled rooms, the crumbling walls, the piano that stood as a silent witness to its past. All of it felt like a reminder of how fleeting life is, how quickly time erases even our grandest achievements. I turned to the page in my journal where I had written down the miner's farewell letter. The desert has taken everything. The diamonds are gone, the people are gone, and now it's time for me to go too. But a part of me will always remain here, buried in the sand. Kolmanskop had left me with a strange sense of peace. It wasn't just a story of loss. It was a story of renewal, of nature reclaiming what humanity had borrowed. A journey's end. As I closed the journal, I felt a wave of exhaustion, not just from the physical journey but from the emotional weight of it all. Each place had been a mirror, reflecting back pieces of myself I hadn't expected to confront. Abandoned places have a way of doing that. They strip away the noise of the modern world, forcing you to face the raw, unfiltered truths of existence. They remind you of what it means to live, to leave a mark, and to eventually be forgotten. But they also remind you of something else, something hopeful, that even in the face of decay and destruction, there is beauty, that stories don't end. They simply change form, passed down through the people who choose to remember. I stood up and placed my journal on the shelf, next to the book that had started it all. Atlas Obscura, Forgotten Worlds. My journey was over, but its impact would linger, shaping the way I saw the world and my place in it. As I turned off the lights and headed to bed, I couldn't help but smile. The weirdest abandoned places in the world had given me more than I had ever expected. They had given me perspective, a deeper understanding of history, humanity, and the passage of time. And, in their own way, they had reminded me of something important. That even in the forgotten corners of the world, life endures.